Hello and welcome to Money, Me and COVID-19, where we meet with leaders from the world of business, finance, investing and politics to understand what's really going on in this pandemic and how we can best position ourselves to survive during this period and hopefully thrive as we come out the other side. And when it comes to today's guest, leadership is very much the key word. He was one of the youngest ever recruits into the SAS, had a long and successful military career, including being awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his work in Iraq and the MBE for his work in Afghanistan. Since leaving the military, he's gone into a successful business career. He's also chaired the Cobra anti-terror unit and been a hostage negotiator in this time. And he provides elite-level coaching to government, to the health service, to business, and to top-level sports teams. His name is Floyd Woodrow. Floyd, welcome to Money and Me.
Graham, it's a pleasure.
Now, I'm sure part of your SAS training covered how to deal with unexpected events, and we've certainly had one this year. As you look back now on how the British government has responded to COVID-19, what are your thoughts on this approach?
I think initially, as with probably most of the leaders around the world, it really took them by surprise, the scale, the ferocity of something like this, which in a lot of cases is surprising, because what you would have expected is quite a lot of the leaders to have gone through some crisis leadership training to have a look at what is the worst case scenario. But sadly, they actually closed down the pandemic risk analysis team. And therefore, I think they were ill prepared for this. I think you've also got quite a few leaders, certainly in the government at the moment, that have not naturally led at the highest levels. So therefore, this took them by surprise. What then happens is you can tend to rely on your experts a little too much, and you're not using your own wisdom, your own common sense and judgment to take that analysis and then make the appropriate decisions. But I'd also say it's easy to look at this with hindsight. Of course, when you have to make decisions on such a large scale that are significant economically, more importantly about the well-being of the nation that you're in government to protect, it is difficult to make the right decisions to start with, because you're getting hit with so many different issues and problems. You don't have all the equipment, you're not getting all the knowledge. So therefore, you do need to step up as a leader. And I think this is where values play a really important part in your decision-making process. And again, I don't necessarily think the government is aligned behind a common set of values. Therefore, you see people coming at it from different angles. I also think the government made a lot of mistakes in going into micromanaging this, with a lot of decisions being made right at number 10, rather than enabling, I think, certain groups to make decisions just based on some common principles. The best leaders are not trying to micromanage all of their departments. What they're doing is they're giving a philosophy of leadership, and therefore allowing the teams themselves to make appropriate decisions. Having said that, I don't think any government has really made the best decisions, because, as I said, the first time you're in crisis, it can be difficult. What I would expect now, though, is those decisions to improve as we've gone through this process. And I don't necessarily think that's been the case. So I think there are still lots of things for the government and the leaders within the government to learn at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my own impression is that what happened was we had the election in December. There was then a pretty major cabinet reshuffle where essentially you had to be a Boris Johnson loyalist and a massive pro-Brexiteer to keep your job. That effectively promoted a lot of relatively lightweight people into the cabinet, all very much focused on Brexit. And was frankly looking the other way back in January and February, when we should have been doing a lot of the preparation for this. So I guess, in a sense, what we have here is not dissimilar to America, where you have a kind of a strongman leader character. Who kind of everyone looks up to for leadership, but actually they're found somewhat wanting in terms of their approach to a crisis like this. So do you think part of the problem here is this kind of strongman style of Boris Johnson?
Yes, I do. I also think there's a problem with the people that he surrounds himself with. I think you've got to take the advisors that are now in position. And whilst I don't know the full detail behind people like Dominic Cummings and people that have a lot of influence, I think what happens then is you start to slow things down with individuals that are not at the right level of judgment. And I think, therefore, when you've got one leader thinking, I know best, I'm going to control everything, we're also now going to take a bit of retribution and remove some of the very talented people that we have in government, or we had in government. I think you're just asking for mistakes to be made. And of course, then when you're hit not just with Brexit, but another very, very complicated issue like the pandemic, you need super talented people around you that can make good judgments. And more importantly, they're familiar with their own brief. They understand the department that they've got hold of. And if you take, obviously, when we had the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that change straight away, and Richie Sunak come in, who I do actually think has done quite well. I do think he's probably one of the stars of the future, but to be brought in at that level and to be hit with this, it's difficult. Although I think he's probably the only one that seems to have stepped up at this moment in time. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think the sad thing about people that think they just know best is that it's a massive flaw in leadership. There's no such thing as one individual that can understand all of the departments that are under their care.
And of course, then you touched on the whole thing with the science, and they've made a big thing of being, the daily briefings with a scientist alongside a politician. But what I think has annoyed me is that they're kind of hidden behind the science to make political decisions. So for example, closing down the economy is very much a political decision. And to say that's justified by the science, I think, is disingenuous. But also, what we've had is so much inconsistency. I've been watching film clips recently on Twitter from April with all these experts and boffins telling us face masks are a complete waste of time, and now we're being told they're mandatory. So really, it just looks such a flip-flop. What's your take on this link between politics and science?
I've got to say, whether it's an economist, a scientist, as we know, they've all got a different opinion. I mean, if we were to be in a place where the world is easy to make judgments on, all of these individuals would be able to stand up, give us the right answers, and the world would be a beautiful place. We know right across from the economy, technology, politically, environmentally, everybody has a different idea. Therefore, what a leader needs to have is wisdom, common sense, and judgment to apply that information to the situation. That's all you do. You never just take, the lawyer that speaks, or, as I said, the political references, or the economist or the scientist. You, as a leader, have to look at it and go, right, that's interesting. I now need to make a decision based on all of these other competing interests. Today's a classic example, isn't it? We've just seen that Spain has been quarantined in its entirety. Yet we know there are certain regions within Spain that are okay and are not even tagged to the mainland, the islands, for example. And therefore, you have to come back and think, right, we need to look at this from a regional perspective, because otherwise we'll be closing down countries left, right, and center, when that may not necessarily be the right decision. I mean, it may be. At the end of the day, as a leader, you have to step up and make those decisions, but you have to be held to account for them. And as I said, I think we go for the easiest way of looking at it, which is a blanket ban, which was not the right thing probably in the first case. And you just, as I said, common sense has to play its part here. And I don't think we're getting that from any government. I mean, actually, any government across the world. And if you looked at this on a pandemic scale, why do we not have a global response to this? Why have we not managed to get all of the global leaders together, our G8, to come back together and say, what is the plan together? Because if we can't even deal with the pandemic together, then we have no chance of sorting out some of the bigger issues that could even be bigger than COVID.
No, absolutely, and I think this idea to, for example, shut down the economy is such a massive decision, and of course all the unprecedented measures that the long-term impact. I mean, we record this. I'm in the south of France in what should be the busiest time of the year. We're seeing empty restaurants. We're seeing very little traffic around the shops. So you think, well, how many of these guys are going to survive to next year? it's really difficult to say that the right decisions have been taken. It's almost to me like an overreaction to protect their backsides from any potential criticism, rather than a balanced response based on a wider kind of view of the overall impact.
No, without a doubt. I mean, that's exactly what happened. We had that classic, I'm now just going to put my head in the sand, because we've also got to think about the consequences now going forward. And I don't necessarily think people have really fully understood that if this does become the kind of recession that it's likely to be, what we've got to now look for is, well, what does that mean on a global scale? Because you can have lots of social unrest. We could have, again, a complete breakdown in law and order. And you can see little smatterings of this in different countries. All of a sudden, things can escalate to a completely different scale. So I think now is a time for people to really come together on a global scale and start to think, what do we need to do to minimize some of the impact that is definitely going to come our way? I mean, I think we're going through, again, a little bit of a phony war at the moment because of the way the government has stepped in and furloughed people, have been able to keep businesses going for a moment in time. But of course, if we don't get back to some kind of structure to the economy, this is just like to get worse, and more industries will close, larger numbers will be unemployed, and there will be no ability to get that back into the economy into a good enough shape that can minimize that kind of devastation. As I said, this could be unprecedented, but with that comes bigger issues, social issues, again, social unrest, and I think there could be significant problems moving forward.
Yeah, I think given your military background, I'd be interested to know whether you'd like to serve in a war zone under General Boris Johnson.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at, again, it's the control. I've just seen that Cummings has been looking at different units within the military, looking at the intelligence services. And again, I kind of wonder, you're asking people that have no understanding of what happens with these government offices and the actual security that they give the nation. More importantly, from a perspective of your armed forces, again, I do think people need to realize that as an armed force, we are there to keep the country safe. We are there for peacekeeping. And the fact that we do the other stuff, the war fighting, just means that gives us a capability to, again, protect the nation. So with people like Johnson, unfortunately, I never think he does the detail. I don't think he really sits down and looks at things far enough ahead for me to have the confidence. But I would actually say, sadly, it's rare I've come across politicians that fully understand the implications of the decisions they make when they send troops into conflict, or they do look at the armed forces. It is, as I said, it's rare that I've seen politicians make the right decision. And as I said, it's a sad thing sometimes.
Indeed, and before we move off the subject of government leadership, I've got to get your take on Brexit. You know, it's now 4 years since the referendum. I spoke recently with Steve Baker, MP, and he said the fundamental issue was the ruling class just didn't want to accept the outcome of the referendum. But here we are 4 years later, the negotiations still seem to be getting nowhere. What do you think has gone wrong with our whole approach to negotiating Brexit? Is there still time to do something to fix it?
I think there's a couple of things. So let's go back to the ruling class and politicians. I think they actually realized, again, for the first time for a while, is that they are there to listen to people. If you make a decision and if you're not giving the right information, you're not educating, then a decision like Brexit was always going to be on the cards, because people get tired of people not listening to them because they're in a small social class. Most of them have just been either at university, done politics, and then gone into leading the country. That's not good for leadership, because they don't understand business or life skills or what is actually going on in the ground. And I think they surrounded themselves with, we know best, people have got it wrong. You throw out a referendum to people, then anything can happen. And because of the nature of the way people viewed politics, they made a decision. And what was interesting for me was I was surprised by the result. I did think that we would remain. But where I realized this was going to be very close is I travel all over the country, and I was coming across people who I would have expected to remain were going to leave for a multitude of different reasons. And therefore, it became really clear to me that doctors, that teachers, that people that you would have just expected naturally to align behind remaining weren't going to do that for a vast majority of. So again, that was significant. Then we had a result, and the bottom line is that's what a vote is. Democracy means that. But we had, again, a political class that decided to ignore it completely and do everything they possibly could to stymie it. And therefore, the country spoke again, and they've come back. And remember, these were people that probably did vote to remain, but were tired of politicians not listening to a democratic vote. So that's why we're in the situation we are, which is a very strong Conservative government, Labour in a bit of disarray, and the likelihood we've got the Conservatives for 10 years, which is not good. You do need to have a competent opposition. Now, coming back to the decision we've got, obviously, and we're going to get to the cliff face. Europe will not, unfortunately, when you've got bureaucrats in negotiating positions without government leaders, you're always going to be into this. Well, it doesn't make any difference to Barnier, does it? He's going to get whatever money he gets every year. He can play the values game, or this is what Europeans, this is what we do, without any responsibility. Ultimately, what I think will happen is the reality of this is what's going to happen economically if you don't make a decision that is balanced. We will leave. And there's no doubt in my mind, people have to brace themselves. We could leave Europe without a deal. But that will affect Europe just in the same way it does us. So I do think there'll be some kind of halfway house towards December.
Okay. Well, let's move on to another area in which you've been personally involved, and that's the health service during this crisis. Now, I appreciate we're dealing with a bit of a sacred cow here, and we have to separate the kind of frontline heroes that we've all been applauding from the management and leadership above that that's, you'd hope, supposed to be able to deal with a pandemic. What's your impression of how the NHS at the top level has responded to this issue and what we've actually seen happening on the ground?
Again, I've done an awful lot of work with middle leaders, and I've seen some phenomenally talented. I ran a program just before we went into lockdown, and with women leaders in the NHS, and they were outstanding. And I don't mean just mean good. I mean they were outstanding, wanting to learn about leadership so that they could better run their teams. I would say, unfortunately, at a higher level, the NHS requires more leadership training. They require people that understand that it is a business as well as it is there about caring. It has to have that balanced approach between those two elements. And more importantly, they need to be more connected to the service that they are supposed to give. But also from an economic perspective, they need to realize we can't keep doing what we have been doing. We will have to rationalize some elements of care. And I mean that in the way of not, still it should be the first point of call. If you require treatment, then you get it. But I do think we need to be clever about how we do this and how they come together as trusts, as groups, to better organize themselves. But also they need some support from business and government about how to run some of these departments in a much more effective way. What I'd also say is that there are different levels of care within the NHS. I've been fortunate to have always had the best treatment. I can honestly say from a personal perspective, I have nothing to say but that the NHS is a wonderful organization. However, I can also say we need to be careful here that the NHS now is back up to being a bit of a sacred cow. There are some areas, and I will take, again, from my own personal experience in Yorkshire, where some of these groups are atrocious. They have atrocious management at every level. It's not just at the top, it's at every level. So I do think we still need a radical overhaul of the NHS in order to make it as good as it is throughout the United Kingdom, not just in the majority of areas, but consistently good throughout the United Kingdom. And that requires good leadership. And people are not trained to be good leaders in a multitude of these senior organizations.
I wonder if there's also a structural challenge, because some of the countries that I think come out of this pandemic better than us, and I'm thinking of Germany and perhaps South Korea, they have a very distributed system with a lot more decisions and a lot more budgets held locally than our somewhat more centralized system. Do you think as we come out the other side of this, we need to think about some radical reform and restructure of how we actually distribute power and money across the health service?
Yeah, I do. But again, within this, you've still got to have the skill set to do that, Graham. So I'd still come back to, you can't then just go, okay, so now we're going to free you up with all of these different skills. We need people to have a better skill set in order to deliver some of these elements. So that's about training. That's also about getting in other parts of the country or the other skill sets. So from, as I said, some business leaders that understand how to do this in a more effective way. And again, I think sometimes we silo ourselves without bringing in, as I said, the right technical skills in order to assist people in these positions. I mean, how many of us have been put in positions with big budgets, not really having the skill sets to understand them? We've learned them on the job. I can tell you, I run for example, where I'm fortunate, I suppose, and the reason I can say this is I run a foreign exchange company, as you know. I'm the novice in this company. I am the novice without any shadow of a doubt, although I've been in this business now for just under a short of a decade. I'm still nowhere close to my managing director, who has 40 years experience, or indeed any of the technical staff who have 20 and 30 years experience. I need them to give me all the information, all the evidence, to do all the data, and then come up with a proposition. But I then make a decision based on that, based on actually as a leader and where I want that organization to be from a vision perspective. I will make the decision. But without having these great experts around me, I couldn't do that. In fact, the business would never have survived. So therefore, we need to make sure we've got people that have the relevant skill sets. And I don't think we do that. And again, force multiply by getting experts in from other areas to help us.
Well, yeah, I think there seems to be something unique about the NHS. I remember a few years ago watching a sort of troubleshooter type program where the businessman Jerry Robinson was brought in to look at the NHS, and he was reduced to tears of frustration because he just couldn't make anything happen between all these kind of warring factions. So, I mean, what kind of leadership skills are going to be needed to actually turn this juggernaut around?
Well, no, you need to have, again, for me, it's a clear vision. So rather than a clear vision, but also you have got to take a little bit of stick, because you're right, it's a sacred cow. And of course, we fall into, whilst I'm in power, I'm not going to touch it, because people will say straight away, the opposition will come in, well, therefore you are going to commercialize this. It's going to become private. When just go, no, this is what we need to do. And ultimately, I think with the appropriate leader that steps and goes, it's a 5-year project, but also where we bring in some of the other groups. So you bring in Labour, you bring in the Lib Dems, and go, right, fundamentally, what do we agree upon? I mean, what do we actually agree upon that's non-negotiable, and start to put some of those structures in. I just think we've got to grow up as a nation, and grow up from a perspective of let's look at certain issues, whether that is about transportation, police, education, the NHS, and just say, look, we've just seen what a pandemic can potentially do to us as a nation, as on a global scale as well. If we just don't start to sit down and come together and think, well, what could we do? What could we work through? We'll be in the same situation, Graham. Nothing will change. I mean, that fundamentally, until we get leaders that turn around and go, right, we need to minimize some of the arguments, this short-term view of the world. Let's just look at the next 5 years. You cannot look at the next 5 years anymore. If we don't start going out to 10, 15, and 20 years, we will fail as a nation. I just think, we'll be okay. People will survive. But I think without having a clear vision, what I would call a super North Star, I just see us pottering about and then surviving rather than thriving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It feels to me like we are at kind of a watershed moment with a combination of the pandemic and Brexit, where we can kind of lay the foundations for a really exciting future with a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity, or we can kind of just bumble along into mediocrity by not taking some of those decisions. But I think the key point you're coming back to is that what it needs is a quality we're not seeing all that much of at the highest levels in politics, certainly, and that's leadership. Which brings me on to the kind of the third and final part of leadership I want to touch on, and that's leadership in the business community. Because in a sense, business has been kind of the innocent victim of COVID-19. You know, that no one was expecting this, and suddenly, wham bam, here we are. What do you see as the kind of things that good leaders in business need to be looking at now to try and A, survive, and B, be in a position to get to those sort of sunlit uplands that potentially are there in the end of all of this?
Right, and this is really important. So again, it comes back down to what's probably going on at the moment. So again, as you know, I work with a lot of commercial organizations, and I'm working with, let's just say I've got 2 or 3 at the moment. One's a global one wants to be a global one. So let's take the one that wants to be a global one. They are in a good, strong position. So, and this is because they're always looking at the vision. What is it we're trying to do? Now, you have to look at it and think, has that changed because of the situation at the moment? In a lot of cases, it won't change. It just means there may be a time delay on when you anticipated getting there. So as I say, your vision is really important, because we must have aspiration. And if it's just about survival, then you'll struggle. If it is about, right, what are we still looking, what is the opportunity in the market, what can we do, what does this look like in order to move forward? That's important, because that's about aspiration. That's about making sure that you have a purpose. And the research behind having a purpose, even in the most traumatic times, is fundamental. And it just means that when we start to look up and go, right, that's still what I want to achieve, it means we start to think in the right way, which is back to what's good leadership as well. One is creating the vision that this is what we need to do. And then it's about the strategy to get there. So logic, analysis, facts, figures, and detail. It's all right saying I want to be a global organization, but if we think, well, that's actually going to be 15 years away now, because we've got to completely rejig our finances. We have to cut down here. We may have to look, right, that's fine. But is it still the vision to be a global organization? Yes. Okay. Then it's just a slightly different strategy. So let's come back to, what are the facts then? Well, we need to make sure we've got a good, we take cost out of the business. Okay, that's fine. But again, what are the facts, the figures, and the detail? Again, analysis, but also wisdom, common sense, and judgment. People will always be the best asset that you have. Always be the best asset. So what do we need to do to make sure we keep the right people? Do we have the right product still? Can we make that product work in the environment? And what is the new environment? What is the competition? What is happening? The East Cardinal, which I talk about as a compass, is your values, because actually this is where I'll see your values. I'll go into loads of businesses and they'll have some phenomenal values. I mean, the values of my organization are respect, are transparency. It's about being entrepreneurial, innovation, and teamwork. And within all of those, I can honestly say to you, we've just made sure we stick to, have we been transparent with our staff? Have we made sure we're innovative? And we have started to come back and strip down all the business to make sure that the technical stuff that we're doing, the IT, the IP, we're enhancing all of those elements, because we've got the team working together. And even when people have been furloughed, we've still been checking in, making sure they're okay, alongside making sure the team that we've had working are all together in what we're trying to do. And that has that's been apparent in a number of different successes.
No, absolutely. I spoke recently with John Geldart, who's the Director General of the Institute of Directors, and there's 2 things that he said which I think resonate with what I'm hearing from you. The first was that these days, if you don't have a purpose, you probably don't have a business, and secondly, that there is still a fundamental lack of training or lack of willingness to invest in management training in British companies. Is that something you see, and how do you think we can address it?
What I would say is I'm fortunate at the moment. I've just been brought into a couple of one great company. In fact, I will say it, if you don't mind, it's AO. And what I'd say is I've just been involved now in training the top team within that particular organization and cascading this right the way throughout. The good thing about it is that people want this kind of training. As I've gone through with quite a few senior leaders, and they're all of them have said, "Oh, I wish I'd had this when I was younger," or "I wish we'd done this," and it's just tweaks in a lot of respects. The experience that they have, they understand it. They go, "Oh, that's why I do this," and so they've got the experience, but now they know why they need it, why it works in this way, because it's about being consistently good. And of course, if you've never been brought through and given some very, very simple structures, then why would you perform at the highest levels? And of course, then it's just about a little bit of luck rather than it's a skill. So without a doubt, that ability to train people is fundamental. And all the things I talk about now, I wish I'd known when I was 35. Again, I've learned it through experience, through reading, through psychology, and then coming across some great teachers and mentors as I've gone through, which allows me to have a bit more knowledge or a better understanding of leadership. But what's also important within the compass then is the warrior spirit. And that is about your strength of character, because you've got to be resilient now. So we know physically we've got to be resilient because, again, the data now between obesity and not looking after yourself, it's not going to go well potentially. So leaders need to have energy, but they also need to know, how do I become resilient? So this is where lots of fear is in the marketplace. People will get scared because that's a natural component of human behavior. So I need psychological resources to just realize that I do need to visualize back to the Super North Star. I do need to realize that I'm a talented leader. Therefore, we need to remember what's gone well in the past. Power words, breathing, all of these mindfulness techniques, which allows us then to realize what I need to do is just readjust, rethink things through, and then communicate the plan to my team so that they can deliver it. And then once we're communicated to, once we have the right story, once we have the right strategy and we believe in one another, we remove all of these inhibitions and we start to thrive in this moment in time. And make no mistake, there will be lots of opportunity to do exceptionally well. And actually, you may need to change direction. There's nothing wrong with that. I've done it 5 times. I've gone into different directions at least 5 times. I expect to do it a few more times, Graham. And we work with people that are very dynamic and have got their fingers in lots of different businesses. Isn't it interesting that children today, the theory is they'll have at least 5 to 7 different jobs in order to work in the marketplace. So therefore, the skills we need are flexibility, our adaptability, communication, resilience. Those are the fundamental skills that will be important. And of course, we just need to make sure that we're developing those attributes within ourselves, that we have people around us to support us, and then hopefully we thrive in moments like this.
Fantastic. That's great advice for any leader on which to conclude our discussion. Floyd Woodrow, thanks very much for joining us.
Graham, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you.